Good afternoon, I'm Robin Palley, here from the Virgilio Haiku Association, and we're here with TAZUO YAMAGUCHI, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about your name.
My full name is TAZUO YAMAGUCHI, and TAZUO in Japanese means the crane that watches over the rice field, and the crane is the high-level symbolic bird in Japan, the same way the bald eagle is here, and of course the rice field is subsistence, so it's pretty much guarding over life. And then my last name is Yamaguchi, which is broken into two words in kanji, means pretty much doesn't translate too much in English, but it means the opening of the mountain. So my grandma would say it means the opening to bigger and greater things.
It's so poetic and beautiful, just right. You had no choice but to become a poet.
And an educator.
You're Japanese, but grew up in America, so can you tell us about your Japanese roots and your connection to traditional haiku, and then where you've gone from there?
So basically, I grew up in California, but I was born in Tokyo, Japan. And the reason was my parents were American citizens, but my father was probably one of the last leading practitioners of Aikido. And the school of Aikido he studied under, the master was dying, about to pass, so he needed to go over there and study with them. So he took my pregnant mom and me over there, and that's why I was born in Japan. They were American citizens.
American.
Basically, they were just visiting so he could study, and then I was born in Tokyo, and then 3 months later I was back here.
I read that you have direct royal descent to the Shigun poets and the samurai class. We are very interested in connecting the work that Nick Virgilio did here with the current of Japanese haiku, especially because Nick was recognized as one of the first writers of haiku in English by no less than the Crown Prince of Japan. In that context, I'm really curious about the ways that you connect traditional Japanese haiku with contemporary English haiku.
So basically, Shigen is the lost art form. In Japan, if you mention the word Shigen, most contemporary Japanese it's the word singing. So the whole art form is lost, and my grandmother, Obachan, was the last living practitioner probably in the world, and a master at it. And what I could understand through my poetry, writing about my heritage, is it was the chanter of the royal court of Japan. So like a samurai would go out on a journey, and then they'd come back, and this poet would probably have an intimate relationship, right? And then the next day perform the journey in a chanting oral form, never written down, to give a poetic picture of the journey. So spent a lot of time, my grandparents were in the internment camps, and they landed up in a very poor place in Berkeley, California. And I would spend a lot of time around my grandmother and grandfather, and they didn't speak English anymore after that incident. So I just basically got to just kind of learn from the doing and just sitting with her and doing. And she would constantly be doing chanting in the afternoon. And she would also do folklore stories, and they're all Japanese, and my language is taken from me because of the internment camps. My parents were very fearful of letting people know we were Japanese after the internment camps. And so basically I would be around her, and she was a master calligrapher. So I can remember many times when she just had to scroll across the floor and just doing this calligraphy. And my earliest probably sight of haiku was how come there's only like 4 characters on this thing? What does it say? You know, and a lot of it, you know, since that internment camp barrier, I would ask parents what it said, and you know, it's just some poem. And so as I started to, you know, like I said earlier, I discovered the haiku like everyone else does in 5th grade. You know, the teacher teaching this syllable thing, and I found myself writing it a lot outside the class, just myself and my own experiences. And I think the later years when I started to realize, you know, what I was doing, I connect back to my grandma. That's what she was doing. And I think that's why I like to call it the art of the short poem, because I think she didn't really call it haiku. She, you know, it was what Mary was talking about, the mindfulness. I think it was just because that's all I can remember of her spirit, is just being able to sit there and the afternoon sun coming through, and she's sitting there doing this calligraphy and
I love it. Synthesis across multiple arts. I loved the way in the workshop you just led, you talked about the connections between improvisational music, improvisational poetry, visual arts, and even the therapeutic value of poetry. Love to talk for a minute, because so much of our work is with children, trying to explore how we use poetry to bring them deeper connection to words and to literacy and to exploring their own emotions. Can you share that anecdote again about the little boy who you were working with?
I started doing performance poetry, and that led me into, of course, looking for work, and then, of course, the first accessible one was going into English grade school classes. And of course, the first thing I found was the power of how I love to perform. And I would go in there and just, you know, go nuts. I'd stand on top of a table and start my poem, and, you know, and these kids, you know, and would just come alive. And I started noticing, like, how can I get them to do it, you know? And of course, long poems was out of it, because their attention span, you know, the class period, I was like, and so then at one point I was like, well, what if, and then that's kind of where I came up with that exercise of the reading. Like, what if I just get them to just do short poems? And then at one point it occurred to me, it's haiku, but that's when I started, like, I don't need to tell them all about all these rules. I need to just tell them this short little poem, and they can do this. So the story I was telling earlier is I ran into one kid that basically was a very troubled kid. Basically, I was working with this classroom in fourth or fifth grade class, and the principal told me, brought me in one day and told me this kid, he's a little bigger, you know, than the other kids, and he basically has a record. He's hit a kid every day since he's arrived, and sometimes he hurts him. He like really hits him. So, you know, that's the first thing I have to do. And I worked with a lot of detention kids too, like in, you know, jails and stuff, and I learned the first thing you got to do is you got to command the language, and you got to command their language. And so I started doing these poems, and like it was incredible how I would do it. But then I was like, okay, now I need you guys to do it. And they're just we don't do that, you know. And so then I just started figuring out, okay, let's just play. And so I started doing stuff, and we started doing popular culture. I started going, you know, give me the same way I did the Apple with you. I'm like, give me your favorite cartoon, you know, and then you make the next episode, you know. And so I had that one kid who was hitting everyone. When I first came in, he was looking at me like, dude, you don't need. He is genius, basically, a genius kid, you know. And I think he's hitting everyone because he had knowledge that he needed to share with everyone, and there was no outlet. So, and then the principal told me about parents divorcing. And that could be a source, so they're not really expelling him, and they're trying to work with them. And she asked if I would see, you know, maybe he likes poetry or something. So I started doing it, and then, you know, he was real resistant. And then I think I remember he said, I finally went around the class and tried to get everyone, what's your favorite? And he's like, you know, I really like Gumby. And, you know, and this is way, you know, I don't know where he found out about Gumby, because it, you know, it wasn't the time, but it wasn't even in his time period. It was like way back. I'm like, Gumby, that's, you know, I remember that. I'm like, all right, so write some Gumby. And of course the first ones he did were really kind of whimsical and a little bit rude, you know, but he read it, and the kids, you know, became a rock star. So he's like, oh, and I'm like, all right, see? And then he's like, all right, now I'm going to write more. And then it got really profound. The next upcoming weeks, he would get up there, and we'd have him read him, and I'd do the reading exercise so they learn how to read him real playful, and he would do these ones that just, the principal, like, you know, I thought I did something wrong. The principal had me back in for a meeting, and she's like, what'd you do? And I'm like, she's like, and she showed me the report, he hadn't hit anyone. So,
I love when you shared that he was writing stories about Gumby at the bridge. And
a bridge between his parents.
And he was building bridges.
Yeah.
You got through to him emotionally.
He was burning them too.
Right.
And okay with it.
Right.
He was like, that's what's behind, man, but I'm Gumby.
So it just speaks to that access we can give kids to their own emotional selves through self-expression and poetry.
And the short form is really powerful,
Right.
especially because the world's so fast. Like we don't, like Mary was saying, we don't have mindfulness. We're not looking at like, even a divorce. We're taught to look at the pain instead of like maybe this is what's gonna fuel, like my life. Like I have a lot of diversity happening to me, but I couldn't do the art I do today without those.
You bring an incredible energy to all this, and I see that you've won lots of poetry slams and poetry competition. We run a big national competition. It's actually become international now. What's the value of competition in an art form like poetry?
I think it just directly has to do with, we all live in a capitalistic world. And, if you really, like what I've learned in my life, if you really want to do your art, you can't disconnect from that. You can't just say, I'm this free floating person. You have to learn how to share your art and bring value to people's life. So I think competition is at the heart of it.
What are the keys in your teaching that you're finding to unlocking passion about poetry and about words in youth and kids?
The only thing that makes an individual who they are today is how they arrange symbols and the frequency and resonation of their voice. And so like what I like doing with kids is it's magical when you show them that they have a story like Tupac, or they have a story like, any pop figure that has influenced their life. They have the same story. They might even have one that's, even more grander.
A new grand story.
And so like, it's the connection. It's if you can get a youngster to read to his peers and they respond, it's endless what's going to happen next. Because to me, it goes back to capitalism. Like I grew up loving rock and roll, and that's what rock and roll does. Like this misfit who did all these things, all of a sudden can get on the stage and do the bar chords and
charm everybody in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. I think I know the answer to this one, having listened to you speak, but do you consider all your short form poetry haiku, or is haiku in an evolutionary moment when, just as it went from being 575 to being free form, where are we now, in your opinion?
Well, what happened to me, like I was telling my story of like how I entered the short verse through my family and through basically my fatal disease. And so I never really saw it as haiku. And then, I found the performance poetry slam world, and that really ignited, that maybe, allowed me to, I've done poetry in all 50 states because of that, and got paid, And so basically when it came into that point of things, and then I got the incredible opportunity to work with the Haiku Society of America, right? And of course the first impression I went in there, right, was like, wait a minute. There's this camp and this camp and this camp and this camp, and if I look at my cultural roots, my heritage, and the roots of haiku, there's no camps. We forget that haiku, Basho was a rebel.
Right.
He made haiku, man. He disturbed probably they probably wanted to gun him down.
Poet, making his living by writing poetry.
But like even when he defined haiku, he was a rebel. He he said this is not rock and roll, this is hip hop. And he probably,
right.
Yeah, we don't have any of that history of like probably probably the Royal Court. Everyone snubbed. They were like, dude, you got to be kidding. What are you doing?
Meeting you today, you have a lot in common with Nick Virgilio, who wrote his poetry on the mean streets of Camden. You both had poetry come out of pain. You fought cancer. You came through the internment camps. A lot of family pain. Nick lost a brother in Vietnam. It was a world-shaping event in his life. Talk a little bit about pulling art and beauty out of pain.
Well, I'll begin that with one of my short verses. Speaking directly from the heart bypasses any major surgery. So that's kind of...
Now, the way you landed that speaks to something else you just did very well with us in the workshop that we should talk about for a minute before we wrap up. And that is, often with kids, the hard thing is getting them to put themselves out there with assertion, with forcefulness, with confidence. And I watched you summon yourself up for that poem, and I watched you teach us to throw our words, to land them properly on people. Talk about the impact of learning that on the rest of life. You had to learn to go from a quiet little boy fighting a terrible battle to putting your thoughts out into the world with impact.
Well, I can answer that kind of twofold. I mean, the reason that I have such a conviction is my father died of cancer the year before I was diagnosed. And he was a master martial artist in, like, I think 10 Japanese martial art forms. He was a 10th degree black belt in Aikido, and but of course he never made his living off of it. He worked as a high school, in the public schools, as a science teacher. And he was also in the internment camps when he was 11 years old. So he also lived a very healthy life. He didn't drink or smoke, he was part of the health food movement before it happened. And he died of stomach cancer. And I have a long poem that I do where I basically was hugging him one day and I held his ribs like bars. And I asked my mother, like, how come everyone else doesn't hug like that? Because I literally went inside his rib cage, and he died of stomach cancer, right, which is the gut. And so basically he never expressed himself. So he got betrayed in the internment camps, and then he got betrayed as a science teacher by Sputnik. Like, he designed a whole curriculum and then they just chopped it. And then so I have two ways of looking at it. One way is, when I was born, he went back and studied under the master. And it took him 10 years to master whatever that is in life, so he was ready to move on. Or, he never expressed himself about the internment camps and the betrayal. And being a samurai heritage, he's very loyal to whatever he did. So when I started finding the oral form, I had to do it. It's like, the thing that your parent didn't do is, I think, one of the main things you need to do in life, and it's some of the hardest things. So I think it comes from that, and the second thing it comes from is, like I said, the music of language. Like, I see so many issues we have in life is because we don't have the music of language anymore. It's always an opinion or someone trying to, and that's the biggest thing. Like, after my father died, I basically grew up on the streets. I had to go to the streets because my mother went to work. So, and I made a lot of connections with a lot of Korean and Vietnamese youngsters who were immigrants, and living in, one-bedroom apartment with a father who works a job that hardly pays it, and he goes to the whorehouse after and he beats up the mom, and they got 6 brothers and sisters. And what I started learning from that is, like, they took me on as a guru, and I never wanted that. I was like, these kids are dangerous. Like, I don't want them doing things, because they're trying to protect their guru master. So I started just realizing, and especially a time that a lot of youth live in today, there's a big, especially with the internet, there is a big difference to communicating with someone through text. Because all your judgment and values and belief are just judging that. And there's something different with the live vibration.
It's so true. And Virgilio himself became a radio broadcaster at one point in his life. And one of the things we're contemplating doing at the house, along with teaching kids to express themselves through poetry and to summon themselves up and put it out there, communicating effectively as you did, we're going to try to raise funds for a media room so that we can teach them to publish onto the internet appropriate things to put out there, and in a way that builds them a following for doing something great. So I think there are a lot of lessons in the way you've taken your history and turned it into your present tense self that we can use. Are there any bits of advice you can offer us as our board tries to keep Nick's legacy alive and get this writer's house up and running for kids in Camden?
I think the number one thing, because I ran a program for about 15 years, that, of course, the number one thing is funding, right? Like, keeping it alive. But I think the number one thing that I think the only organization probably in the States, and I don't think they do it at a level because it's really difficult, is the organization Youth Speaks. They're out of San Francisco, and I think they have a New York division and a few other places. But
maybe we'll connect up with them.
Yeah, a thing that I address a lot in my poetry when I work with youth is, like, you can't open the want ads and see poet in there. to get a job.
That's right.
And so what
And
happened?
every skill you develop as a poet can help you get a job
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you do see there, because the ability to express yourself, to connect with people, to be creative, all of that is a big part of being successful.
One thing I found though is, especially the youth today, because of hip hop and things like that, it got to the point where I had some of the most powerful poets on the planet in my hands, and they were 18 years old.
Wow.
And it's a sad story. They went on to do things. I mean, they were talking politics, and we could have went into the finals and won with the strategy we had and everything. But they all wanted to write new poems, and they got up there and they said this one line, and I've still not recovered from it. They said basically, if you give a job to every poet in the house tonight, you will shift corporate America. And, you know, the sad story is, you know, I could never build that, so they're doing, you know, poetry is bad news. They're far away from it now.
We'll try to build a path that lets them keep it alive.
One thing I could insert into you is, you guys know the Tom the World Poet?
No?
He's from Massachusetts. Okay, I've only ran into probably Tom, and that's probably it. Maybe there's two more, but one of the most profound things they taught me when they first taught me, and I was laughing at them at first, they wrote on the board, one of my first lessons with them, they wrote, you know, the word spelling was around before the written word. And I was like, that's stupid. And then I learned what they were talking about. And so, yeah, so, and I think hip hop did it, and when you're working with kids, I think it's something that I don't know how you bring it back, because I can't find enough of me. Because even when I go into like poetry signing world, I can't tell anyone. I tell them, and they're all, he's a good improver. They just keep me in the box. They don't, because it makes them go, you know, this writing thing is poetry, but it's a different form. It's something else. It's that whole thing that I'm telling you, that even the metaphor, I'm writing, I'm right. I'm writing it. I'm right. I'm gonna, you know, do that capitalistic thing. I'm gonna write this thing until I got it. So I'm gonna, you know where I'm throwing the bombs. You know, right? And oral poetry is, I think, the most ultimate way of being a poet, because you have to be vulnerable.
Exactly right.
You don't know what.
You have to keep your spirit alive, and you have to sense and be mindful.
Yeah, and in politics you can get hurt too, because you say things and you don't know what you're impacting.
Right. Do you have a poem you'd like to close with?
The poets of old were ancient key locks. They turned a time calendar, sunk it into the earth, let it rise like towers, and let it sit beneath the morning sun. But every time it crawled itself out, almost like a creature, a yokai, a timeless being that spun things and rearranged and mixed ingredients like the chef, turning things back and forward until the taste was mixed, salt, sweet, and bitter. They told their tales almost like there was something rising from the center of ourselves. It would ebb and flow back and forth. It would take those time keys and hand these things called skeleton keys. If I build a totemic image of sunflowers and machinery gears and rats and blooming lilacs and pens that drip of oil-fed ink, did I say anything? I was just decorating your insides. I was hanging all these skeleton keys on those late nights you will awaken. Almost like the moon struck you like lightning. You will bleed out the blue horizon until you find yourself wondering again. Because in the bottom of the well, there is still this wondering, this turning. And they always try to give you a dictionary. You know, maybe A, B, C, D, L. Maybe he's lazy. Maybe he longs for things. But sometimes they always return back to A. That's it, he's arrogant. But I remember the day that my mother walked out the front porch. She walked like a man into the big world because she had to bring in all the change that was trickling from the sky above that had been darkened by every single judgment that had turned itself into a cage. And out it came with just decorations, the turning of time, hanging those keys on the locks that seem to unlock themselves when the wind blows.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's a poem that speaks to how we won't label you as one type of poet. I expected a haiku. I'm thrilled with the long form.